Hello and welcome to the third in our video series demonstrating the VPAT product. In this video, we're going to look at the analyze function in the tool, and we're going to look at basic and graphing and basic graph controls. And in the next video, we're going to take a closer look at workload analysis. So here we're going to start at the analyze screen, and we can see it's pre-populated with the file names that we created from the extract step before. And the analyze function is going to read in these 5 files and use them to present content and visual and analytic data. So there's 2 types of analysis that we can perform here, as we mentioned. This video is going to focus on LPAR and KEK level graphing and usage, and the next level is really going to dig into more of the workload and service class performance analysis. So you can note at the bottom of the screen here that we had the same read and save options that we've had in place for other screens that we demonstrated earlier. And this will allow you to save the file names that you see here and bring them back at any point in time. So we can also see that there's the run button next to this. This is used for workload analysis, and it's going to be demonstrated in the next video. So next to each row of data files, we have graph buttons, and we can see that next to the LPAR report file that in addition to the graph button, we have 3 different options. So if we click on the first graph and we're going to look at general CP busy, we are going to now see that we are seeing CPU usage by LPAR on the KEK and total busy on the KEK as a whole. So while we have this chart up, we should notice that it reflects the hardware model that we're running on, and it lets us know what the capacity, what that model number is here. And we're actually going to go back and update this to be 15-minute intervals because that's what this data is stored at. So you can change that whenever you like. And we'll go back in. And now we can look at basic graphing controls. So these are going to be common on most of the VPAT graphs. So if we if we right mouse click on the white background area here, we can change the graph display from a area chart to a bar chart, and we can change it back again as we desire if we need to. So that makes it easier to look at some views of data, especially when you have less data and you want to see more granularity. We can also use, when we have multiple dates displayed here on the chart, we can click on an individual day from the x-axis, and we will actually zoom into that day. If we don't like the colors that the graph is displaying, we can right mouse on the legend itself for that entry, and we could say change prod 3 to be bright yellow in this case if we wanted to. Once we've zoomed into a day, well, actually anywhere we can do this, but anywhere where we have on the x-axis, we can trim the left and right starting and ending point. So we started 0014, but if we really just wanted to present the center of the graph, we might want to move the left side of the graph over a little bit more. And now we're starting at 214. We've suppressed that the first 2 hours of the morning. Same for the left side. We can move the left side in or out, the right side in or out. And we have a plus and minus sign on the y-axis, and where it's necessary, we might want to click the minus sign here, which will bring ours up to 50% showing the top of the graph and allow us to see greater detail. And we can click on minus to go back to where we just were. We can click on plus sign to go back to the 100 point. So we also have different options to display metrics in what format we want them. So right now we're seeing utilization, which is in the form of 0 to 100% on the machine. We can also look at MSUs. And again, now we're going to see that we're seeing a red line representing the peak MSUs on the machine. That's from the LSPR default table. And if we were to select the MIPS button here, this is the point where we have an option to enter updates to our specifications. So if we ran ZPCR and came up with a different MIPS rating, we might want to change this value here to make it adhere to measurement standards or IBM's capacity planning methodology. If we had multiple configurations in place during the month, perhaps we turned an engine on at some point in time, so it became a 711 or more, there would be a grid that would allow us to scroll forward here, and we would be able to change the model rating each time there was a change, and then VPAT would accept the new values. We're going to leave them as default for right now. So Once we return back here, we're going to go back to the main analyze panel. So we're going to click return from here. And we're going to select the 4-hour rolling average. And this is going to be an estimated 4-hour rolling average. So we're going to click on graph. And the first thing VPAT's going to do is tell us, well, on the starting data starts on February 8th, and we don't have a full 4-hour interval. So let's just continue to the next day. So we will do that. And now VPAT is estimating our rolling 4-hour average. So it started at the beginning of the 9th, and it's estimated 4 hours, and then it's beginning to average the utilization. So we can see that as that progresses during the month, and we can monitor this, and it should help us adhere to some software pricing analysis. So we're going to go back, and again, we can display this in MSUs, or we can display it in MIPS, and we'll have the option to update, again, the specifications if we wanted. If we return back, we're going to look at next the IIP CPU busy, which is zip on CP usage. So this represents zip eligible workload that is running on the GP engine. So when we click this graph now, to find this out, we really have to point the data also to the service class data, to that level of data to get that specific metric. So we're going to go in, and just like most of the VPAT panels, there'll be an S button that we can actually go and select the workload data here. And now we have selected our graph. And we're going to look at just general zip on CP usage. And we can see that we've had on the 15th, we've had a little spike up to about 16% of our GP engine was being used by workload that was otherwise zip eligible. If we return back, we have another option here, which lets us see IIP CPU versus the overall zip busy. So perhaps that overflow was due because our zip engine was totally occupied. So we can click this option and leave the same selection for the service class data in place, and we can say okay, and we can now see that in fact that peak usage, when we hit almost 17% zip usage on GP that day, was when the overall zip engines were saturated. So this may be something we want to look at, what workload was running, what systems were using the zip engines at this point that caused us to have this amount of overflow. It may also indicate that we have a potential situation for some needed for additional zip capacity. So we're going to scroll back, and we're going to now look at the rest of the graphing options. Now we can click on the graph option next to the zip row, and we can see general zip busy, and we can see our color selection has been retained, and we can see how busy our zip engines were in general. And yes, zip engine was almost 100% busy here, and we can see what LPAR was responsible for that. So we can actually zoom into the 14th if we wanted to, as we saw earlier, and we could actually change this to be a stacked bar chart to make it perhaps a little more legible. And we can see that it all is yellow with a little bit of green up on top. So that's just an example of how we can manipulate some of the chart displays to see some greater detail. So we're going to return back to the general graphing now. And if we had IFL information for Linux engines on the Z machine, we could graph those from here. And if we wanted to look at our coupler facility busy, we could look at this row here, but these are the same graphs as we've just seen, with the same selection and the same drill down functionality and the same click on functionality. It should be mentioned here that when we're looking at a general graph, there is a mouse over function. When we click on the mouse within the graph, we can see specifics about what date and time interval we've selected, as well as what LPAR and what selection we've got, and what our CPU configuration looks like at this actual interval. So we can return back. The last thing we're going to demonstrate right here now is that we're going to click on the workload report file. The report class data will work the exact same as their workload report file in terms of usage. So we're only going to demonstrate workload for the sake of making this video a little shorter. When we click the graph option here, we're going to see a similar selection requirement. Since we want to look at service class data, we have to tell it what LPAR it comes from. And now we can begin to see all the service class data here. Let's go back and talk about one last thing though. We have this minimum utilization percentage for graphing. When it's set at 2%, when we look at this chart, we're only seeing entries and service classes that have utilization of 2% or greater. So we can see that this is a shortened list. If we return back and we come in and change this option to be 0%, this is going to force VPAT to show us all of the service classes, even those very low utilization or those unused. And we can see that we have several more service classes that have shown up, and the legend is a lot busier. So again, we'll look more into detail on how to use this and how to use these options in our next video. But this chart will work the same way. We can drill in by date, and we can click, single click. We can change the report format, and we can change color options as we need to. So this brings us to the end of our third video, demonstrating the first part of the analyze function. Please stay tuned, where we'll take a further look in the next video into workload and performance analysis. Thank you very much.